everybody, and welcome to this wonderful Engineering X Day. We hope that you're all enjoying the program so far. It is my pleasure to introduce you to building and maintaining creative and collaborative engineering culture, but most importantly, to introduce you to Shane Hasting. To get the ball rolling, though, just a few notes on housekeeping. I want to make sure that everybody is aware, first and foremost, that this session is being recorded. So if that's not to your liking, please leave, but I'm sure that none of you will mind. The session is going to be 55 minutes. We're going to have a 40-minute presentation from Shane, and then we're going to have some questions at the end. We invite you to hold most questions to the end, but if you're really keen on a topic, please do let us know. You're welcome to stay after today's presentation, but the following presentation will be in Russian. So this was asked to let you know that. Now, I'm going to say hello to Shane at this point. Shane's, in fact, I find it a privilege to meet Shane. Like many of us, we've been working on projects all of our life. We have worked with Agile, and we want to know what it is, especially in these days of COVID, to be safe and to work productively. Shane has been the lead editor for cultural methods at infoq.com, and that's where he works now. Sorry, that he has been the lead editor for cultural methods at infoq.com. He is currently the director of community development at Agile, for Agile, and he is a very practiced speaker. Recently, he wrote a book. I encourage you to go to Amazon or your favorite online retailer to see No Projects. And Shane is very concerned about delivering psychological safety, great work environments, and value to customer. So Shane, it's my pleasure to introduce you. I've noticed in your work, and I thought it might be nice to hear a little bit from you, you talk about psychological safety and radical candor. Now, before we go into your presentation, I wondered if you could tell me a little bit about how you apply these practices in your life and what you like to do on a day-to-day basis.
Oh boy, psychological safety, just making it, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the talk, just mindfully being aware of the impact that we have on the people around us. Just how we speak, how we show up, how we interact has a huge impact. And particularly if you're in a position of influence or power in an organization or in a group, you need to lead by example. Being vulnerable, being yourself, and making it okay. One of the definitions or descriptions of psychological safety is that I can take a risk. I can express my opinion, and I know that even if it's wrong, if it doesn't work out, my colleagues have got my back. The people that I'm with will support me. We might laugh together, but they won't be laughing at me, they'll be laughing with me. And that's okay. Part of this creating the container of psychological safety. And it also helps to have a funny hat.
Yeah, very good. Well, I'm sure for all of those listening who are working in many different countries across many different cultures, this is going to be an exciting talk. So why don't you tell us a little more?
Thank you so much, Kate. So I'll pop that hat off because it is on the photograph there. Good day, folks. Yeah, I am Shane Hasting. My day job is I'm the Director of Community Development for IC Agile, and I have been the lead editor for all things culture and methods for infoq.com since 2008. I'm also the host of the weekly Engineering Culture podcast, and as Kate kindly mentioned, the co-author of the book No Projects. And the content that I'm drawing on today for this discussion about building and maintaining a collaborative engineering culture comes from InfoQ. So once a year, we do a thing we call the trend report, and this is the current one for 2021. And each of the areas, each of the domains in InfoQ, we have our own trend report. So in the DevOps space, in the architecture space, in the AI/ML space, and the other Qs that InfoQ covers, but the one I look after is this culture and methods. And here's what we looked at. So we present this across the technology adoption curve. Over on the left are the topics, the practices that we're seeing innovative organizations adopting in the IT space today. So the InfoQ target audience is very much the engineering audience that is the target of this conference. And we get about 1 million unique visitors a month to the InfoQ website. I'm going to encourage people to come there. And what we're seeing over on the left, the innovators and the early adopters, these are the things that when we look for new content, that's what we're looking out for at the moment. And we're seeing these as trends that are going to, some of them will cross that chasm and move across to the early majority and late majority organizations. Topics that are over on the right are ones that we know we've already got a lot of content about on InfoQ. So we're explicitly focusing, and my talk today is looking at a lot of the stuff that we're seeing coming out of that left-hand side here. Things like developer experience, employee experience, team self-selection, good remote work versus bad remote work. We've all been thrown into remote work over the last 2 years, but there's a big difference between the organizations who are getting this right and the ones for whom it's still not really happening particularly well. The focus on humanistic workplaces resulting in better cultures which become attractive to better people. And it's a self-reinforcing cycle there. The shift into leaders as coaches, topics such as host leadership, going beyond servant leadership, and some of the things I'm not going to talk about in this talk, but that are on the InfoQ side, things like the AI ML tooling, but even going so far as AI systems as teammates in technology teams, in development teams. There's some interesting work happening there. So what are some of the important topics, things that help us to create this collaborative, effective culture? A good starting point, I suppose, is what is culture? And this is an article by James and Suzanne Robertson that looks at their book. The book is called Happy to Work Here, and it's how workplace culture affects workplace performance. Johanna Rothman describes culture as the lowest common denominator of the behavior that you will accept. And the you in that is the leadership in an organization. Culture cascades down. If people at the top are bullies, the whole organization is going to be filled with bullies, because those who don't want to be in that space will leave. And in this era of the Great Resignation, as it's being called, we have to be very conscious that, you know what, people have the opportunity to leave, and with the shift to remote and to hybrid work, we can leave without leaving home, without changing our location. I live in New Zealand. I work with organizations literally all around the globe. There are times when that means, like tonight, I'm doing something at 9 p.m. That's the time it is here, but I choose that and it works for me. It gives me a whole lot of flexibility. So culture isn't a happy, clappy, feel-good thing. Culture is something that explicitly impacts the performance in the workplace, and as a result of that, the profitability and the effectiveness of the organization. And I touched earlier on retaining good people and attracting good people. And when we think about attracting people, we want to do that with a view to the additive nature of the culture, because culture is also the combination of everything that we bring together. In the book, James and Suzanne talk about a number of drivers of culture. and they talk to the perceived value of people. How do particularly leadership see the people in the organization? Are they resources to be assigned, or are they creative human beings who bring a uniqueness to us? Likewise, the perceived nature of time. Are we picky about the starting times, and how much are we measuring the number of minutes and the number of keystrokes that people are doing, or are we looking at focusing on outcomes? Safety and security is part of that. Do we treat people as grown-ups? If we think about it, in our lives, we are all trusted to make huge decisions. We buy houses, we have children, we buy expensive vehicles, we choose where we live. And yet when we go to the office, we often don't have the authority to buy a cup of coffee or book a flight without going through 5 levels of approval. So how do we treat people with that trust? And that this gives us the bond of collective confidence, and then the perceived value of excellence and beneficence in the organization. So these are all factors that are drivers of culture. There are the killers of culture, and there are the improvers of culture. And we need to look and mitigate the killers and enhance the improvers of culture. And Kate, we touched on psychological safety. Well, there it is. The role of a leader in a psychologically safe environment is to embody the behaviors that they expect others to emulate. You can't say it's safe and then when something goes wrong, have a shouting match. It's safe, and when something goes wrong, okay, what happened here? Help us explore this. What can we do to make sure it doesn't happen again if there was a problem? And creating this environment of intellectual bravery, where it's easy for people to say what they think and feel, to be honest. Now, this concept of psychological safety has been around since, I think it was about 1991. Amy Edmondson did the original research. The fashionable approach, or the fashionable recognition of it in the workplace, came with Google's Project Aristotle, which was 2015, 2016, I believe. So it's, and in Google's case, they found that psychological safety accounted for more than half of the difference between high-performing and low-performing teams in the Google context. It's linked to many aspects of performance and to innovation in organizations. And the leader's role to create that safe space and then allow people to experiment, because initially they're not going to trust. We're going to be very, very nervous unless there is already safety. If I'm a new leader and I'm trying to create this space of safety, I've got to give it time to distill through the organization and make it explicit, make it a very clear statement that we're aiming for this, and okay, we might make mistakes. When we do, it's okay to call us out. And then the leader's response is going to immediately show what the impact of that is. Do we really mean it? Or is it just lip service? And as with many of the organizational improvements and new ways of working and new ways of being in organizations, there is a lot of places where it's lip service, where it is lipstick on the pig, so to speak, where we change the language, but we do nothing about changing the behavior. And we're dealing with highly intelligent people. They know when it's not really safe. So if you are a leader looking to create this collaborative culture, you have to lead truly by example. And it's about the changes you make within yourself. And that's about mindfulness. That's about being conscious and aware of yourself as a complex system and as a part of this organizational complex system. And it's not much more than just keeping calm. It's a habit of deep reflection that leads you into a state of flow and gives you the emotional strength to hold that space of safety for your team. And I would encourage team members to think about, okay, how do I mindfully show up? And this term mindfulness, mindful it's almost becoming a buzzword, but it matters. It's about stepping into any context with a conscious, deliberate choice about how I'm going to behave, how I'm going to show up in this context right now, today. And I might not get it right all the time. I'm a human being. I'm going to make mistakes. I will come to work in a bad mood sometimes. But I need to be honest enough to, when that happens, be open, be vulnerable, be clear that, yes, this is what's going on with me. That also makes it safe for that's what's going on with my colleagues, with the team. And this brings us to a little bit of a conversation about mental wellness. The reality is that 1 in 5 of us at any point in time will be struggling with some sort of mental illness. If you look around you in the office, if there are 4 other people in the room, 1 of them is struggling. How do you help? How do you support each other? How do you have the conversation that is, how are you really? And that, again, is part of this vulnerability. The topic of mental illness is often shrouded in taboo. It hinders the open communication. But opening up about it, being honest that, hey, yeah, I am struggling with this, helps. It makes it safe for others and allows them not to feel so alone. It's hard, but it's also really powerful to allow yourself to ask for and to accept help. It can be really daunting, but it's a skill that can be learned. And showing this vulnerability, admitting that you've struggled, it's not a weakness, it's a strength. And again, in terms of creating this culture, supporting each other and acknowledging that, hey, things are tough. If we think back of the last 18 months, nearly 2 years now, things have been really tough. A lot of studies are showing that that 1 in 5 has become 1 in 3. People have really struggled through the lockdowns and the other elements of this hard time that we've gone through. So having that conversation, how are you really, is important, and being open. Another important factor is tackling the imbalances in our industry. Diversity and inclusion in the software engineering industry sucks. We have been terrible about being a welcoming space for people who are not like us, for people who are different. And it's time we stepped up and took responsibility for the change from within. We all bring biases. We all bring our own background and perspectives. I sit in the most privileged group of all. I'm the middle-aged white male. It's time we acknowledge that there is this privilege. In New Zealand, we acknowledged yesterday that every working woman in this country, or most working women in this country, are now working for nothing for the rest of the year, because the pay imbalance is about 9%. That's fundamentally wrong. It's something we need to fix. And it's something we can fix in our organizations with the stroke of a pen. There are people high enough in the organization who truly can fix some of these imbalances, not all of them, but with a stroke of a pen, it can be fixed. And it's time that as an industry, we stepped up and made these changes. And this brings me to, how do we make sure that we are welcoming? If we want to build this great collaborative culture, the onboarding process, when we bring people into our organization and into our teams, is one of the first places, and it starts before they walk in the door. It starts with the first interaction with our organization. How do we show that this is a great place to be, and we invite people in when they arrive? I don't know about you, but I have been in a situation where I've arrived in an organization ready for my first day of work, excited, gone up to the reception desk and said, "Hey, I'm Shane. I'm here to start my new job." Let me, who you supposed to be meeting? Yeah, no, they're not there yet. Can I find the, and you spend the first morning sitting in reception feeling like unwelcome and just disregarded. But then maybe you get into the office and they've got a desk, but there's no computer, and you haven't got a login ID, and you haven't got access to all of the production tools that you need, and so on and so on and so forth. How do we change that? How do we make that onboarding experience one that shows that not only are you welcome here, we're glad that you're here because of the additive nature of what you are bringing to our culture? And it's not difficult. How do we then expand that to the overall employee experience all the way across and through the organization? The developer experience, the employee experience. How do we remove the friction? Why do we need those 5 layers of approval to make a small change to I saw one space, one company, where to spin up a new test server took 3 months of procurement, authorizations, and permissions. It was ridiculous. And it wasn't, they weren't going to buy a new server. They were just opening up another instance of an existing cloud infrastructure. And it took 3 months. That sort of friction in the developer experience is ridiculous and shouldn't happen today. The cognitive load in the processes get in the way. How do we have, and there's concepts of the developer experience engineer that we're starting to see today, and how do we improve that? How do we create that space where we treat these responsible adults and empower them to be effective in their workplace? And one way of empowering them is to allow them to make some pretty big decisions. Like, who do you want to work with? This book by Sandy Mamoli and David Moll, an excellent exploration of self-selection in our teams. How do we create a space where people can choose what they want to work on and who they want to work with? And there are a number of organizations out there. The article that's referenced on the link there is one from Redgate Software about their reteaming process, which they do on a regular basis, where I think it's about once every 6 months, everybody comes together and they choose, what am I going to work on in the next cycle? What team do I want to work on? What technology, what tools, what people do I want to work with? And it's up to the
Here's what I found.
It's up to the teams to make those decisions. And yes, we put some sensible guidelines in that you can't have a team that doesn't have all of the skills needed, and you have to have the skills in the technology, or you've got somebody who in the team who can teach you the technology stack that you're going to work with. And there's some guide rails we put around it. But again, this is about treating the people in our organization like responsible adults. They make these kinds of decisions for themselves at home on a regular basis. We choose who we want to hang out with, who we want to be work with, in volunteer organizations and so forth. Well, why can't we do it more in the workplace? And this needs a huge shift in the skill of the leaders. We need to shift from being the directive manager to the supportive leader. We've heard the term servant leader. There's another term that I'm finding much more attractive, the host leader. If you think of the host at an event, they are facilitating and making sure that everyone is productive and has a good time. That's the responsibility of leadership, to remove the obstacles, to create that space where the people in the team, these highly skilled, excellent professionals that we have employed because they're amazing problem solvers and really good at the job that they do, because that's why we employ them, that these people are able to be as effective as possible. And as a leader, I need to show up with empathy. I need to show up with facilitation skills. And the image here is some of the tools from Liberating Structures. As a leader, go and learn to be a good facilitator. Go and learn to be a good coach. And a coach is about supporting people. And think of that concept of host leadership. And if we have that space, we can get to an environment of radical candor. And Kim Scott wrote the book literally called Radical Candor that this comes from. And she says there are two dimensions: the care personally and challenge directly. How much as a colleague or as a leader do you care about this person, and can you challenge? Is it safe to challenge? On the bottom left, where we don't trust, we don't care, and we don't want to challenge, you see manipulative insincerity. Oh, that's nice. On the bottom right, where I can challenge, but I don't particularly care, you see obnoxious aggression. You fool, how could you do that? On the top left, where you care, but it's unsafe to challenge, you get the ruinous empathy. Oh, you poor person. And in the top right, where you genuinely care, about that person you're working with. And where it is safe to have these challenging conversations, you get to a space of radical candor, where you can say, this happened, this was the impact. What are we going to do about it? How do we overcome this? And we can create that space where people grow and we experience and we see profound change. It's hard to get to that space, but it's incredibly valuable for the people and for the organization when we can. And I would point you to the wonderful conversation I had with Kim on the podcast, and also to the book, Radical Candor. Think about our organization structures, the approaches that we take. The image on the left there is from my book, the #No Projects, where the approach of working in value streams, thinking about products, not projects, and changing all of the way that we tackle the delivery of value to our organizations. But we also want to look at other structural differences. How do we bring in ideas like sociocracy, like holocracy, Jutta Eckstein's work, and Jutta and John, on beyond budgeting, open space, sociocracy, and agile, all woven together, and the book is called Bassanova. On InfoQ, we have a whole EMAG, a whole, it's a mini book that looks at how organizations brought this in. And the whole idea here is moving to flatter organizations with more empowerment of the people in the teams doing the work. Another thing I would point you to, and this is a wall of text, so don't try and read it, but the work of Manuel Pias, and I can mark, and to my chagrin, I've forgotten their name, his name, but the book is Team Topologies. And it looks at the structure of team. It taps into things like Conway's law and makes suggestions and gives you guidance on team and organizational structures that are going to be effective in different contexts and at different levels of maturity in your organization. The book, there it is, Matthew Skelton and Manuel Pias. Talks about the different types of teams, and that's what's in the images here, and it gives you the context for where each is most appropriate, and also pointers for when you should not use it. So there's some very powerful stuff in there. Again, we've got articles about it, and I would point you to that book to think about deliberately focusing on shifting the structures of our organization in order to facilitate the engagement of people and the flow of creativity. And another book that I would point you to is the work of Richard Sheridan. How do you create joyous workplaces? And I was privileged a few years back to spend a week with Menlo Innovations. And Menlo is an amazing organization. They build life and safety critical software, and they've embodied the philosophy, the principles of extreme programming and of all of the agile approaches, and they've taken it, they've turned the dial up to 11. What you see here is a photograph I took of the daily stand-up. Now, the daily stand-up can be micromanagement from hell. But in this organization, it's a collaborative event where people let each other know what help they need in the work that they are doing right now. And there were 75 people in the room. The daily stand-up finished in less than 15 minutes. And that collaboration that happened was phenomenal. After the daily stand-up, what happened is small clusters would form of people who are who are now looking to address, this is the struggle, this is the problem I've come up with, let us help you fix it, and then move on. And that's just one example of the great collaboration. I would point you to two Richard's books, the first one, Joy Incorporated, and the second one, Chief Joy Officer. And again, we have a number of articles there on InfoQ about them. Ethics and tech for good. Our industry has an ethical problem. We need to tackle this, and it's time we stood up. There are a number of codes of ethical conduct for software engineering. I'm going to say that not 1 in 100 software engineers has read a code of ethical conduct, never mind committed to one. The one I would point you to is the Association of Computing Machinery Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct. It helps us reflect on the impact of our work. And at InfoQ, we've tackled this. We've deliberately made it uncomfortable because we call it out. What are the ethical impacts of things like the blockchain? What are the ethical impacts of AI? What does it mean to be an ethical software engineer? Why should we care about technology ethics? What is the impact of the work that we do? And aligned with ethics is a conversation about climate change. Our industry consumes around about 7 to 8% of the energy produced in the world today. We have a bigger carbon footprint than the airline industry. There's a lot we can do, but there's also a lot we can do to put pressure on the providers who can really make a difference. The big consumers of that energy are the cloud providers, the Amazons, the Googles, the Microsofts. Well, we can start talking to them about, hey, I want to make sure that where I'm hosting my services, the energy is clean and green. Most of the cloud providers now make it visible where your instances are hosted and where they're drawing their power from. And we're seeing more and more pressure being put to have a smaller carbon footprint in our industry. And we can do it. There's a lot we can do. So I hope I've given you some food for thought. I hope I've given you some ideas to create that collaborative culture. And I hope I've given you a lot of references. Go and have a look at InfoQ. We've got a lot of deep articles that go into this stuff and will provide you with what you need. But I want to ask you, what are you going to do? Ask yourself. This is about a personal transformation. If you want to create that culture of safety, you have to become a safe person. If you want to create that collaborative culture, you have to become a collaborator. You are responsible, to quote Gandhi, be the change that you want to see in the world. Think about, how do we transform ourselves? Where are you now? Where do you want to be? And the last reference is, I will point you to, we've got a whole mini book on designing your culture on InfoQ. So there's lots of resources available. Thank you for listening. Kate, I'm in your hands.
Okay, well, first of all, I want to thank you for a fabulous presentation. I was watching the chat and I can see that you have touched a lot of people. I'm going to ask everyone who's now listening to start, if you have some questions for Shane, I invite you to ask them. But there's one thing, a couple of things came to mind. I think, first of all, one of the correspondents listening has said, is this something that's just directed at a team leader? Is everyone, could you just comment a little bit on that for a minute?
Absolutely. This truly is about every member of the team is responsible for creating that culture. Yes, the team leader is the one who often has the biggest influence, but every member of the team needs to be mindfully showing up as a collaborator.
Absolutely.
As a member of that team, as a supporter. It's about caring for each other.
Okay, and I think that's a fabulous sentiment for everyone to listen to. Now, there's another thing that I'll ask, which is, we as EPAM are very often going into a client. Most of the people who are listening to this call, if they're from EPAM, and if they're a client, in fact, have their own culture. So what techniques have you seen being used most effectively for each and every one of us as we either attempt to shape and mold our own culture at EPAM, or whether we attempt to interact successfully with a client? How would you encourage us to do that? And I guess for many people, how would you, what techniques would you give people who are perhaps a bit concerned about a client culture they're going to, for whatever reason, it doesn't matter. How can they engage that? Could you give us some help on that?
No easy topic. Hey, first and foremost, I'm gonna say the Gandhi quote: "Be the change that you want to be." Choose how you want to show up, and make that a conscious decision. If the culture that you're going into, needs some change, if there's a bullying element to it, for instance, how would you tackle a bully? One of the most important things is, don't give them the space. So consciously, deliberately think about how am I going to show up? If I'm aware that there may be some challenge there, think about it in advance. Also, get support. Talk to your colleagues, talk to your peers. Give me advice, give me ideas. How have you tackled bullies before? Bullying is one of the chief destroyers of culture.
Okay.
But there's also the insidious stuff. And think of how can you sit in that top right-hand quadrant of the radical candor quadrants, being genuine.
So of course we can all really take a step, and as you say, take responsibility, engage each other in the conversation. And I guess if we're EPAMers, talk amongst ourselves, talk with our client. But what you're saying is think and own your response, and be a part of that success, if you will.
Yeah.
And I'm reading here in the chat. I think we might be coming towards the end of the questions, but I think I'll ask one more just to maybe wrap us up, and before thanking you very much for all that you've given us today. And it's really about, you were talking about AI, you were talking about ethics, and I thought that was a fabulous observation. And I'm not sure how many of those on the call are aware, but actually the European Union is legislating on the topic of ethical systems next year. And so if you're a software provider to a European Union citizen, as of, I think it's April the 1st next year, you're going to have to be responsible. Actually, you have to register systems of high risk and so on. And so I thought your call out on the book was fabulous. I think, anyone who's listening to this talk should take the action, as you're saying, to read a book. But what tips have you seen, just to close out here today, how can we, what methods have you seen to sort of uphold ethics in software? Because I think it's a growing concern, and I think it's going to be very, very significant to all of us listening.
Well, first and foremost, wherever you are in the software delivery chain, think about the ethical implications of what you do. If you're writing a line of code, is what I am doing right? will this avoid harm and will it improve the overall human condition? And if not, maybe I shouldn't write that line of code. And that's sometimes going to take a courageous act. And I don't want to trivialize that this could be a really, really difficult thing to do, because, you know, if I am tasked with, I don't know, let's take an example, the engineer who wrote the code that changed the engine emissions on the Volkswagen emissions scandal a few years ago. That engineer went to prison. No managers did. Should that engineer have written that code knowing that it was actually designed to commit fraud? Now, that's an extreme case. But think about every piece of work that we're doing. If I'm an analyst looking at the design of a software product, how could this be misused? And how do I prevent that from happening? What do I need to build into the design to prevent that misuse? And it's taking that, it's not accepting the, oh no, I'm just going to do what I'm told. It's taking the blinkers off and saying, what is the implication of of the work that I'm doing? If you're a professional engineer, like in the civil engineering space, they actually get trained in ethics. Sadly, most software engineers have never had any ethical training. And I've been involved with an Agile Alliance initiative where we've been coming up with a code of ethical conduct for Agile coaching. And there was a 30-person team, and we had deep discussions and conversations to try and come up with, okay, what are the ethical frameworks that we could provide? And the person who had, I think, the biggest influence on us is a lady who is a coach in her day job, but is a trained ethicist, and she works with 7-year-olds. She goes into schools and teaches kids about what ethical behavior is. And she held us up really hard in terms of, okay, think about the impact of your behaviors. If a 7-year-old can do this, why can't you? And it's thinking about the scenarios and the implications and the what ifs.
So I think you've made fabulous points. And I think that's a really, really significant one for us to all think about as we leave the call today and think about our role in ethics. So I just want to take a moment to say thank you so much, by the way, for being here today, for opening our minds, I think, to the side of software development that, frankly, I think is the most important part. And I've worked as an engineer myself and written code myself, but I think through my life, I've understood that it is about the people. It is about, as you said, psychological safety, radical candor, and productive collaboration. And I think making that real is super important. And I think, you know, for those on this call, if you want to read more, here's Shane, you know, how to contact me, we can contact him. And also do remember that he has a book, and I think it would be great for us to take a moment to read that. So thank you again, Shane. I know it's getting late over there. Thank you so much for your time. We really enjoyed it. Thank you. Bye-bye.